European market, but it's certainly not the dominant market for Siemens sales these days. Our energy sector is divided into 6 divisions. Basically, we cover everything from oil and gas down in the ground relative to the technologies needed to bring it up out of the ground, to the switches and distribution devices that basically allow the lights to be turned on in big buildings like this. So an oil and gas segment, a fossil power generation segment, renewable energy, services to take care of all of those, the big heavy wires, the transmission group, and the smaller distribution level activities where smart grid kinds of things are developed. Siemens has about 5,000 employees in Florida. We have thankfully, we have over about $500 million a year in payroll here in Florida. We have 59 locations and about 1.2 million square feet worth of facility space, most of that white-collar office space. We do have communications manufacturing facilities and even some turbine service manufacturing facilities down in Boca and some other locations, but almost all of our efforts here in Florida are intellectual property based rather than heavy manufacture. And basically, Florida Power and Light and Progress Energy and GRU and others are good customers of ours, and we sell about $1.3 billion worth of energy-related products here in Florida for Florida customers. As I said, we've been out by UCF in our quadrangle campus for 25 years now. We have about 3,000 or over 3,000 employees there. Again, a white-collar environment with engineering, marketing, project management, procurement, business functions. And it was until from 1980 through 1998 Westinghouse. And Siemens acquired Westinghouse Power Generation back in 1998. So for the past 10 years, we've been Siemens Westinghouse and now Siemens. And most of the growth in the past 2 or 3 years has really come from environmentally driven businesses, environmental cleanup and renewables, wind in particular. If you look at Siemens overall, we have an environmental portfolio that is really second to none. Our biggest competitor, of course, is General Electric, and you can talk about dancing elephants and eco-imagination and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to sales and products and that kind of stuff, over over $22 billion worth of sales globally each year is in environmental products that drive down the amount of CO2 that's emitted globally. In the next 3 years, or 2 years now, I guess it is, we expect that to grow by another $10 billion. So it's one of the fastest growing segments of our company globally. And we're part of the group of companies in the United States, US CAP, that is pushing for a climate change policy that includes cap and trade or some measure of putting a price on the cost of carbon. And hence some of the products that help do that is improving the efficiency of existing fossil power plants, certainly renewables, and then transmission and distribution efforts. Siemens Water Technologies, also a part of our industry group, is into filtration and water purification. Mobility in terms of those electric rails and mass transit systems we're talking about, as well as Osram Sylvania is so Sylvania Light Bulbs is a Siemens company globally. Here in Orlando and in our energy segment, the primary things that I think we can claim as the cleanest of the clean energy, those renewable kinds of things, is first of all driving up the efficiency of existing fossil power plants. Basically, those old dirty coal plants up in West Virginia and Midwest and that kind of stuff have moved from about a 28% average efficiency to 35% average efficiency over the past 15 years or so, in part by upgrades and modernizations and those kinds of things. And every percentage increase in efficiency, of course, means fewer carbon dioxide emissions. Certainly there's been a lot of cleanup of sulfur and NOx emissions and those kinds of things. And part of that is due to the second area, and that is through air pollution control on major power plants. We acquired a company called Wheelabrator Air Pollution Control a few years ago, another company, a New Jersey company called Advanced Boiler Technologies, and both of those deal with cleaning up coal-fired power plants. So that's a current mission in one of our current high-growth kinds of markets. The future way of, in part, cleaning up coal from a from a clean use capability totally is basically, instead of burning it, to gasify it. Gasification allows coal to be used as a feedstock, as a petroleum substitute in all those plastics and other applications. They also allow the total capture of CO2 through from a coal fuel power plant, and hence the early startup, if you will, in technologies relative to cleaner use of coal as a source is through gasification. And of course, the renewable success story is wind, but also our energy sector, because of the amount of waste energy that exists in heat in power plants, is a natural for our desalinization business. So we are the largest provider of desalinization systems coming out of power plants, or coupled with power plants, primarily in the Middle East these days, but also it's a fairly big market for us. You can see that the ramp up in both our environmental systems and service business and our wind power business has been a relatively recent kind of thing over the past 3 or 4 years. And you'll notice, not that there are numbers on the sales axis, but you can tell that there's a doubling and tripling and quadrupling of sales over a 2 or 3 year kind of time period, in terms of actually hundreds of millions of dollars. So both of those are our fastest growing areas, and hence when asked about clean tech and to talk about environmental kinds of things, that's a natural message for us, and one that we're very happy to do anytime we can. Wind energy is not the traditional view of, not necessarily the traditional view that's held of a small wind turbine out on a farm maybe being used to pump water. Those systems still exist, but technology has moved. Technology and composites and control systems and new types of generators and those kinds of things have allowed a ramp up in the size of individual wind turbines and indeed wind projects. So Jim mentioned that the best winds are out in West Texas and up in the plains and up in Wisconsin and Minnesota. That's right, and indeed the size of wind turbines, my favorite graphic is we're now 2 747s high in terms of wind turbine size on the biggest systems. Those allow us to drive down the price of wind such that we're nearing the point where the subsidies aren't going to be needed anymore. The typical wind farm order that we have these days is several hundred megawatts in size, so it's essentially at the same scale as the traditional coal-fired power plant was maybe 20 or 30 years ago. So wind energy is becoming a much larger part of America's energy generation resources, and certainly growing in size relative to the sizes of the product. Florida's best wind resources are offshore. That is, the winds are much higher along the coast, or just off the coast, than they are onshore. And that is the area that we would see market development for wind energy in Florida. The longest suffering U.S. wind project off of Cape Cod finally got its environmental impact report published last week and looks to be moving forward. And you can tell from the bottom half here that the Europeans, Denmark and Germany in particular, have moved offshore with projects that are very significant in size. There are also some very large mega wind projects. T. Boone Pickens doing a 2,000 megawatt, the size of a nuclear power plant, wind project in West Texas. Two others, one in Minnesota, Another one, the offshore London, are the kinds of things that will move wind energy from the small-scale kinds of systems to get up to that 20% of the total electricity generation, or a much larger percentage of the electricity generation. Basically, with Siemens Energy, we've added about 700 new jobs in wind energy alone in the past in the past 2 years, since January of '07. About 100 here in Orlando, and again, the engineering and projects kinds of people. We've opened a new factory, Fort Madison, Iowa. Unfortunately, when you're shipping airplane-sized components around, transportation becomes a very big part of the decision. And the Mississippi and being halfway between where the two largest markets are sort of drive where those big factories are going to be located for wind energy. So there is hope certainly for component factories like the one in Ohio that President Obama visited a couple days ago. But the big component places are going to be where the transportation systems are the best. Basically, we've initially sized that factory for 500 megawatts. That's about the size of the Stanton plant out by the airport, and we've doubled that capacity in the past year in 2008, such that we can now put out wind blades and wind turbines that can meet the market demand. Of course, Siemens, there are other renewables beside wind energy. Solar thermal is also at the hundreds of megawatts size power plants at this point in time, and the solar thermal mirrors and focused thermal systems and driving steam turbines it has traditionally been a big business for us. We are in the United States anyhow have 100% market share with all of the turbo machinery in solar thermal plants. And I doubt that we'll be able to maintain that record, but certainly we know very much about doing solar thermal power plant development. And also we are in a packager and an installer of grid scale solar PV systems. So hence we're a customer for the PV manufacturers more so than the manufacturer of PV equipment ourselves.